Hi everyone. This is my 11th DjangoCon, I think, so I've been coming here for a while, and on Monday I was sitting next to a first-timer, someone who I'd never met before, and they immediately angered me. Because one of the things they said to me right away almost, they were like, oh, I'm not even a real developer though, I'm just a customer success person, in a way as if it required some kind of apology that they were not a real developer, someone I'd never met before. How dare they come to a DjangoCon, as if it gave them less right to be there. And I got very annoyed because it just frustrated me that someone immediately sort of deprecated themselves in that way. Because, what do you mean, only a customer success person? We need customers. They're kind of a big deal. We live in a capitalist society. If we don't have the customers, what am I going to do? And I didn't tell them, because I thought if I start this rant at you and raise my voice, I don't think I'm actually helping. So instead, I decided to deal with my anger by submitting a lightning talk. And here we are. It also angers me because when people speak in such self-deprecating ways, even if it's subtle, I also see it in some of my friends when it's not about tech at all. There is things that people have been taught, they have been told these things by other people. They have trained themselves to think this way about themselves, and it is a pet peeve for me. So I often try to counter that when I can. It's not that hard, but this one annoyed me even more because, what even is a real developer? Am I a real developer? I don't know. What does that mean? Because I am certainly not the best Python developer here. I'm not the best Rust developer, not the best JavaScript developer. I've never used HTMX, even though it's all the hype. Not the best at SQL. I know how to spell Django correctly, so I have one step ahead of one of us here. Maybe like Python, I am the second best choice at everything. I have approximate knowledge of many things, but there is so much I don't know. I don't even know about all the things I don't know, and yet, I don't know, am I still a real developer then? And what do I even do with that? And I think some of our feeling as developers that we sometimes have a superiority, I feel a little bit of that sometimes, is that there's this idea of independence. I can just take out a laptop, I can sit anywhere where I have internet, and I can make things. And in a lot of professions, you can't do that. You need a lot of infrastructure, you need a lot of other resources. But what do I really do all day? I just press a bunch of buttons, and somehow that flips some bits on some storage in ways that I don't fully understand, and I feel like I've tricked the rest of the world into thinking this is worth huge piles of cash, because we get paid relatively very well. And we're not even that independent, because, like I mentioned before, customer success people who write documentation, people who answer the support desk, who do finances, they are actually all essential in in making any of our work useful at all. So there is no real independence without the people that use and sometimes also abuse our work. So am I really that more independent than my friend who works in a supermarket? They get paid minimum wage and they sell food to people, which kind of feels a lot more important than the bits I flip on a daily basis. And this has been a source of conflict in me for quite a while, that I question what I'm doing. Is there actually a point to this? Because all of my work is ephemeral. In 10 years, all of it is gone, I hope. All of it. And I can't be sure, but I think by the time I'm old, I still probably have a few decades left, I don't think I'm going to think my big regret in life is not using a factory pattern that time, or being I optimized that SQL query really well. That's the great accomplishment of my life. I'm glad that in the, 60, 70, 80, 90 years that I've had, that I've contributed such things, which in the meantime have already been replaced 100 times again. So, what does that mean, I asked myself? Are computers good or bad? Is there ethical software development under capitalism? I don't actually know, and I also don't know what to do with it, and I don't know if I'm ever going to figure it out. But what I came here to encourage you in this event, where we like to dig down so much into the little obscure details of our field, and very obscure niche things sometimes, how do we get the request just half a second faster to the client? Actually, that's half a second. It's way bigger than the skill we should talk about. All the little technical details that we also always remain critical of what actually matters. Because I don't think it's any of our code. I think rather it is the impact we have on other people. It is the products we make, how they make other people's lives better, or worse, how they get used, how they get abused, how they sometimes harm other people, sometimes help other people, sometimes enable them, but also the people directly around us, the people that feel that they don't belong here because they are only a customer success person, and who needs customers anyways? And so I came here to encourage you also to think much more carefully about what we leave behind besides our code, because our code is going to be deprecated way faster than anyone can say real developer. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so. Okay, yeah, that's fine. I have my slides, but yeah, that's fine. No worries. So sustainability. So I'm just here to talk about the what, why, and how. So yeah, I'm just going to get right into it. So sustainability, according to Wikipedia, is commonly referred to as preservation of natural resources, an ecosystem to preserve human life on Earth. So essentially, what can we do, or things we do, to ensure that natural resources essentially is preserved? And then you're asking the question, why should I care about sustainability as a developer? Simple answer, because yeah, we are humans before being developers, so to say. So what can you do to contribute to making the world, or Earth generally, a better place and a conducive place for us to live in? If you're lucky, the government of your country is doing something regulation-wise, companies, and all of that. But what can we as individuals do to contribute our own quota? Because at the end of the day, I feel like we humans actually emit more carbon than some of these companies, or we are sort of like the reason why some of these companies emit a lot of carbon, so essentially. And then if you care, or if you feel like there's a lot of heat, or the weather recently in the UK was fluctuating and all of that, then you probably want to care, because a little bit of biology, we as humans, we give out CO2 and then we take in oxygen. The plants are supposed to take in the CO2 and then give out back oxygen. The nature sort of like finds a way to balance itself. So if there's sort of like an imbalance, then it causes a problem. So what can we do better? So I have some couple of things here on how to be sustainable. First, save water. So that could be anything around as small as your wash loads, how you wash your clothes, and all of that. Reduce energy usage. So perhaps don't plug your laptop and leave it there, even when it's indicating it's fully charged. You know, you could do that. So on a bright sunny day, perhaps turn off the lights, use energy-saving bulbs, buy efficient or just gadgets that use energy efficiently. Sell or donate unwanted items. Again, my slides are not up, but yeah, unwanted is sort of like in quotes. So I don't know about you, but we have some developers who line up all the sort of like all the models of a MacBook since a long time ago, or iPhones. You could say that's technically maybe not, you don't need it. So perhaps just give that out, either trade it in, have it refurbished, send it to some part of the world where it's most likely going to be useful. I don't know if you heard Sam talk yesterday about somewhere in Nigeria, in Abia State, where some people don't have access to laptops. So if you feel like you have a laptop that you don't need anymore, maybe just give it out or sell it. Recycle. Here in the UK, I know there's a lot of recycling going on, but just in case anywhere in the world that is not something to talk about, maybe consider it, reduce your plastic waste, and maybe go for bottles instead. Where you can, use paper plates or the ones made out of bamboo. Drive less. I feel like COVID has done a little bit. Encourage all of us to be more remote first. So if you necessarily don't have to go to the office, maybe, or if you are sort of like in a place to actually detect some of these things, maybe you could cut down on that, reduce the travel. You could use a lot of virtual meeting applications now. There are a lot of them out there, so perhaps consider using that. Purchase sustainably, purchase sustainable products, purchase what you need. I feel like this talks to me actually as a human, because I'm sort of like a gadget freak, so I try to like buy the latest and the greatest sometimes, or buy some stuff I just consider fancy. That's perhaps not so good, because then again, if you don't ask for those products, then the manufacturing companies won't have to sort of like manufacture them. Yeah. And one last thing, share, donate, and volunteer. As much as we try, we still emit some sort of carbon. So you could give to some organizations that plant trees, or you could volunteer to perhaps pick plastics out of the water or something, and all of that. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Round of applause and take it away.
Thank you very much, and I'm glad that my screen is up there, because I cannot show a demo without showing something, so that's at least I'm lucky. And it's really nice to hear talks about sustainability and talks about inclusivity. Like, we've been YAML engineers. I've been a YAML engineer in the past, so potentially you've been the same as me. So today, we're going to talk about how we can understand how a Django project works and how we're approaching this at platform with the tool we've created. So a few words for me. I've been working with Django for maybe 10 years now, but at my current role, we don't use Django a lot. So when the chance approached, I immediately grabbed it, and here we are. So what we need to do is, so before we start, how many of you want to write YAML files? Yeah, I expect that, okay. And just to make sure that you're not tired, how many of you like Django? Okay, so, you're with me, so now we've done a bit of stretching. So at platform.sh, we use YAML files to be able to configure your application, and because, of course, nobody likes to write YAML files, we want to make sure that you can easily deploy your application to us. So what we've done, so here I have a simple Django application. It's just a starter project, so nothing very interesting there. And what I'm having here is I want to create the YAML files to deploy platform.sh. So what I'm going to do is run the command called project init. So this is the command that goes into your project and tries to understand what happens there. So immediately from the directory, it understands this is called platformify Django demo. Okay, that's fine. And then asks me for a few services. So, okay, I like Postgres. Who else does like Postgres? Okay, I was expecting that as well. And of course, Redis, because we need to cast things. Because we love it, and because it saves energy. So if you use caches, then you use less compute power and less energy. So immediately, this created a few files for me. So let's start with what you potentially know. So in my settings file, it went and added a few more settings. So it's going to easily integrate this with the settings that we have. And then it created a new file for all the settings that I have here. So, for example, it understood that I have a Postgres database since I told it to, and now it's configuring things like my databases, my platform directory, all that kind of stuff that we need to start a new Django project. But it went one step further. So what we did was create the file, and this file, so it got Python 3.11 because this is the latest version. Everybody likes the latest stuff in there. There's a lot of documentation, but I won't bother you with that. It understood that I'm using poetry, so I'm using poetry for dependencies, so it's taking a version that's recent enough, not the latest one. 1.5.1, I think, is the latest one, so we'll have to update that. And also, it's creating all the build steps. So, for example, it's installing poetry initially, and then using poetry to install my dependencies. So my project will have everything it needs in there. Of course, we're a Django project, so collect static is always a must. And then during deployment, it's going to run migration. So try to understand as much as possible my application. A few other interesting things. So now you see it has prefixed everything with poetry so that we can run all our application inside the virtual environment. And also it identified that there's a different Python path because my application is hosted in a subdirectory. So we try to find that from the WSGI file and the settings file and make sure it's there. Also, it's hosting my static facets in a different directory and serve them to /static. So that's also good as well. And there's a few more things like my relationships and everything. But what I wanted to say was, how did we create this? So what we're trying to do here is we're reading your files. We're looking for files like poetry.log to see that you're on poetry or piplog or something like that. Anyway, I don't remember the name for the file for pipenv, all that kind of stuff. And we try to identify this Django project and so on and so forth. So we did this with Go. Unfortunately or fortunately, I code a lot with Go lately, but it's still a nice thing, and we're going to open source this pretty soon. So this is it. I will spare this extra minute. But if you have any more questions, or if you find this interesting, feel free to catch me later or catch us tomorrow at our booth. And thanks for being here. So this is it.
Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. I am Lautaro, and I'm going to talk about FastAPI. I'm experienced doing it on production. So, FastAPI. We are in a Django conference, I know it, but it was for our use case. And I want to ask who is using FastAPI on production? Yeah, brave people. We have a problem in the real world, so I want to explain why we choose FastAPI. I was working in a warehouse management system. We ship a lot of orders, and these orders need to go to a direction, and we use carriers. These carriers have an API, and we need to quote to get the cheapest quote, and we need to run this as fast as we can because time is money. Our tech stack was FastAPI, SQL Alchemy, and HTTPX. That is like a request, but async. Our infra is in AWS. We use the ECS service, which is like a container runner that run a task that inside is a container, and inside the container we have unicorn that is spawning a unicorn process. We use the official Docker image of the FastAPI, and once we deploy it to production, we start seeing 5-of-2 response. And it was hard to debug because our application was running, and on Sentry we don't have anything. And it was because we have a load balancer in front of our application, and we have a TTL between the user and the load balancer, and the load balancer with the application. Because our official Docker image have a default TTL that was lower than our TTL from the user and the load balancer, the connection was down, and that the load balancer didn't know what to do, and the response was 5-of-2. The solution was easy, just to increase the time to live of the connection between the load balancer and the application. Well, what I learned was we don't use the official Docker image. We build from scratch. The creator said in the documentation, but we didn't read because we are programmers. Please all use async tools to do the queries and to hit the external APIs. And another thing another thing to notice is that the documentation says if you have a load balancer in front of your application, don't use unicorn, just unicorn process and let the load balancer scale your application. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, I'm Sage, and I'm going to show you a small Easter egg in Django. I promise you that it's going to be quick, so, sorry. So, for those of you who don't know what an Easter egg is, it's something that's hidden in the software or video game or whatever. Like in this image in Wikipedia, if I click on this hedgehog, it takes me to this Easter egg page. So that's an Easter egg. And what I have for you is not that exciting, but before we get into that, so Django's logo. So yeah, I'm actually going to talk about an Easter egg in Django's logo, not in Django itself. Django's logo is made using this font. It's called DTL Procyon, made by this person called Erhard Kaiser. DTL stands for Dutch Type Library. So let's try recreating the logo with the font. It's not quite the same, because if we look at the actual logo, the G is slanted. The cap of the G is a bit slanted, but that's not the Easter egg. So if I just go and open the SVG file and try to look into it, so it's been made in Adobe Illustrator, so it might have been edited. So let's copy this SVG into Figma. Let me just, and see what I'm talking about. So that's the thing. And I'm wondering whether we can fix it. So if we want to try and fix it, so the reason why is because it was manually edited to have the slanted edge right here. So if we want to fix it, we can move this handlebars for the anchors. So, sorry. Sorry, I'm not a designer. So let's try and fix it. Right, that's more like it. But, so that makes me wonder, how long has this existed? So if we go through the history of this website, back in 2005, before Django was even officially released, we didn't have the community tab, so you cannot even download the logo. And if I try to open this image, let's see if we can get it. No, it's too low resolution, you cannot see it. And it was just a GIF image. So let's move forward. So this was back in 2005. It wasn't, so Django was not even released. So back in August, we have a community page, but still nowhere to download the logo. So, but in March of 2006, we do have an option to download the logo. So let's download it. OK, I have the file right here, and let's try to put it to Figma. OK, moment of truth. Are you ready? Yeah. OK. So my question is whether to fix or not to fix on the DjangoProject.com repository, because if we take a look at this, yeah, it's still there. So if you think we should fix it, raise your hands up. And if you think we don't, okay. The thing is, if we fix it, then we will lose this Easter egg forever. So I guess I'll leave it for any one of you who wants to fix it. Okay, that's a good idea. All right, I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Sage. Please.
Hello, everyone. I thought I could start by giving a brief introduction of myself. And if I were to be described as a Django model instance, this is how I would look. As a record in a database, my name is Ishwari, also go by the name Isha. I'm a director of software engineering at Wazuku. I would call myself as an inexperienced speaker. This is my second talk, but I don't think I have enough experience. What do I do at Wazuku? I lead a very talented team of engineers, and we build a B2B SaaS enterprise application for helping organizations to innovate at scale. If you'd like to know a bit more about us and what we do, please feel free to find me, and I'm happy to discuss further. So what am I going to talk about today? I said Django Trade Secrets, but then I changed my title. It's Simple Trade Secrets. I would like to talk about things that I learned from my mentors and peers when I started my Django journey. Simple tips and techniques that helped me improve my development. Three things. How can you effectively manage your settings file to become more productive? How can you use Django's inbuilt logs to understand what queries are being run under the hood, and how you can use SSH tunneling to run your local code against a QA database. First thing, manage settings. What does anybody who's read the Django documentation, this is what it will say. What is a settings file? A settings file manages the configuration of your application. This is a simple hypothetical example. You probably have a function which sends notifications, and maybe you have a settings, debug settings. When you're running your application under debug settings, you just want to print the content on your console. If not, in QA environment, staging production, you're actually going to use a email provider to send emails. When you start learning Django and you learn the Django settings, you're trying to understand the code. What I used to do a lot was go to dev.py, just make debug as false and see then what happens, and similarly try out different settings. And sometimes you just forget that you have experimenting with settings, and you commit the code in, and then it gets deployed to a QA environment, somebody complains, emails are not being sent. Yeah, I screwed up. So this is the first thing I learned. You can actually organize your settings files into a module, because settings files are ultimately a Python module. So when you bootstrap a new application, you just see a settings.py file, convert that into a settings folder. You can have different settings files for your different environments. In our team, we encourage every new developer to create a setting files of their own name, and then we have a git ignore file in that folder, which explicitly calls out which files will be checked in, and everything else can be ignored. So given this setup, what will happen? Sorry, I skipped a bit too further. Sorry. This is what you do. Run your server with the minus settings parameter, mysite.settings.ishwari. And if you notice here, you will see when the Django server comes up, it talks about which settings files it is using. You can also set up a settings module environment variable in your shell, and then if you just do manage.py run server, it's that environment variable, the module in the environment variable that's going to be used to bring up the server. You can take and improvise this a step further, create an alias for yourself, mysite, and point it, basically run the command, which is set up the Python path, the Django settings module, the vbin, and startup, and the Django admin script, and you start your server, right? So next time you log in, mysite run server, your application is running with your own settings file. So this is something very simple, and something that helps you develop faster. and you're experimenting reliably and not checking in bad code. The second thing I would like to talk about, I'm just unsure, sorry. The second technique I would like to talk about is Django is very powerful as an ORM, but when you start developing and you're a new developer, you really want to know what is that SQL query that's running under the hood, especially if you come from a different stack. Like it's like, I know this is how I want to write the SQL query, but what is the ORM asking me to do? There are great tools. There is Django debug toolbar, there's Django Silk that we all use, but there is something even more simpler. You can actually set up your logger such that the logging that's happening in Django's DB backend, you will see those print statements on your console. So in this code, if you see, I basically set up a logger for django.db.backends to print the debug statements on our console, and it happens only in the debug environment. So when your settings file has debug equal to false. With this, if you see now when you start up your server, you see a SQL query come up with a timing, and then if you shell and try to run some query, you'll see what's the backend query that is running. You start seeing the sprint statements. You can improvise, convert that handler into a file handler, and now it's easier for you to see, hit a page, what queries are running, and you know what the SQL queries, you can analyze that better. I think I'm probably out of time, so I'm going to stop here. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Conference. So, Becky Smith is going to talk to us about coding your health. Thank you.
Hello. I'm Becky, I think you know that. I'm also the shortest person at this conference, which is why I'm standing here with this microphone and not there. So I want to talk to you about clinical coding systems. When I'm not organizing DjangoCon, I'm a software developer at the Bennett Institute for Applied Data Science. We are a cross-disciplinary team of clinicians, academics, and professional software developers. And amongst other things, we work on OpenSafely, which is a secure analytics platform for NHS and for analyzing NHS electronic health records. Our goal is to make access to NHS patient data open, fast, and reproducible while protecting patient privacy. So what are clinical codes? When you go and see the doctor, they enter your information into your electronic health record, and they do that using codes from a systematic coding system. One of the most commonly used is called SNOMED-CT. It's a huge hierarchical catalog of concepts containing over 500,000 codes. So you might go to the doctor with a cough. They might also record it as complaining of cough. Then they'll ask you some more questions about perhaps whether you cough after eating or at rest, or whether you're when you're doing exercise, or when swallowing, or whether you also have a fever. Maybe along with that, they'll record whether you have a sore throat. As well as clinical findings and disorders, SNOMED has codes to allow clinicians to record relevant things like places, objects, and occupations. Open Codeless is part of the OpenSafely platform. It's a Django site. It's built to allow researchers to create, share, and maintain code lists. It helps with our goal of making research reproducible because it means that you can record the strategies that you use to develop a code list. It supports multiple coding systems, not just SNOMED, and it handles ongoing updates to those coding systems. What do we mean by a code list? Researchers use code lists to describe a particular disorder or area of clinical interest. So, for example, they might be interested in adults who have a diagnosis of asthma, but there are many codes that describe asthma, and not all of them correspond to a current diagnosis. So, for example, this code list has lots of codes under the asthma category, but it's excluding a code for childhood asthma. Open code lists lets you build a code list by searching for codes. The search strategies are stored with the code list. So Here I've searched for cough, and I can choose to include or exclude certain codes or categories of codes. So that's all very useful and worthwhile. But what's really interesting about SNOMED are some of the weirder bits of it. So if a clinician wants to get a new code into the UK version of SNOMED, they can go to this website and submit a request. This means there can be some somewhat unexpected things in the coding system, and the reason they're there is because a clinician sometime had a valid use case for them. So it has, for example, a section on casseroles, which begs the question, why? What did someone do with a casserole that required it to be entered into SNOMED? Did they burn themselves with it? Did they drop it on their foot? Did they poison themselves? Why only vegetable ones? Sticking with the food theme, there is a surprisingly extensive classification of puddings, although it's strangely incomplete. So sponge pudding is classified into its narrower, very British child codes, but it has some notable omissions. Surely someone must have injured themselves with a sticky toffee pudding at least once. Sadly, there are no results for Django, but is it really surprising that Django's never hurt anyone? Some codes really make you wonder what happened to get them in there. Accidentally caught in an ironing board. I need to know more about that. There is a detailed breakdown on the different ways to trip on different things, or be intentionally tripped, and yet an oddly ambiguous standalone code for tripping. Gardening is apparently a rather dangerous pastime. Some codes could be custom-made for cyclists in Edinburgh. And it's somewhat concerning that we need this depth of classification for events related to being sucked into an aircraft jet. If you're interested in learning more about the good work that we do at OpenSafely, have a look at our website, our docs, and our GitHub repos. All of our platform code and our research code is open. Thank you very much.
Hey, I'll just introduce myself. So I'm Paul. I'm currently a Django developer at a Danish company, a time registration company called Intempus. It's a great place to work, and I'll be talking about the Postgres trigger notify pattern in Django. So I just want to introduce a really simple Django application that we can talk about throughout the talk. So it's a simple web application where users can comment on articles, and it's governed by these two models here. So we want to introduce a new requirement to our application. We want to have the feature such that when someone comments on an article, the author of that article receives an email to let them know that someone's commented on it. So that's a fairly ubiquitous pattern in web development. You have some database event, and then you want to invoke some callback based off of that event. So the canonical way, at least for me, to solve this problem would be to use Django signals, which allow you to invoke a callback when some action occurs. In our case, the action is the creation of the comment, and the callback is the function to email the author of the article. So this is what it would look like using Django signals. You have a post-save signal, which is invoked when someone creates a comment, and you have the email callback, which emails the article author. So it's a very common pattern that probably a lot of people have seen. It does have some shortcomings, though. The one I mainly want to talk about right this second is the fact that the email is sent in the same thread as the comment creation. So this necessarily hampers comment performance time. And it also introduces another point of failure. So if it happened to be that the commenting is transactional, i.e. occurs in some atomic block in Django language, then an error encountered when emailing will actually roll back the comment creation. So it's actually kind of reducing comment experience while adding this new feature. So really what we want to do is try and take the emailing out of the comment creation thread, i.e. make it asynchronous. And a very common way to solve that in a Django application is to use some sort of message queue framework, Celery being the most popular, that at least that I'm aware of. So I won't go into detail, but this is roughly what the solution could look like using Celery. The essential difference is here that our signal is still there, but our signal does not email anymore. Our signal just sends a message to a Celery application running a completely different server, or different process rather, and it takes care of the emailing for us. So that's kind of solved the issues we mentioned before, but there's still quite a few shortcomings to this solution. So first is another issue with signals themselves. Signals can be missed. Anyone that's dealt with signals has probably found out the hard way that bulk creates and bulk actions in general, such as updates, are missed by signals. Communicating with the celery broker adds another point of failure. So whilst we've taken emailing out of the thread, we've just added communicating with some other system into the thread. It's actually quite challenging operationally to add celery, especially if you want to do it for something as simple as just emailing someone. And communicating with celery is not atomic with respect to the comment transaction. That can lead to a lot of interesting race conditions. So Postgres to the rescue. So the first thing I want to talk about is Postgres triggers instead of signals. So in Postgres, a trigger is basically a database function which is invoked automatically when some event, such as an insert, occurs. So it's a lot like a signal, but the crucial difference is that a trigger actually lives within the database. And as such, they're more robust than signals in some regards because they can't be skipped by things like bulk operations. And then I went on to introduce the listen notify protocol instead of as a lightweight alternative to Celery. So Postgres comes with this native messaging protocol defined by two commands, listen and notify, and it allows one Postgres connection to asynchronously listen to notifications sent by another. And in this way, you kind of build a basic foundations for a message queue natively in Postgres. And it's a very common pattern to notify a listening connection after some trigger is invoked and then have it processed asynchronously. And this is the trigger notify pattern that the talk is titled after. So this is why Django PG PubSub was introduced, which is essentially a library which does a Django abstraction of this trigger notify pattern. And the main idea is to allow developers to easily write Python callbacks, which will be invoked asynchronously whenever a trigger is invoked. And really, the main tenet is to be an alternative to the signal Celery pattern, which I introduced before, and address some of the shortcomings that I've discussed. So this is, again, I won't go into much detail, but this is kind of what the code would look like using Django PG PubSub. The two main components are we have this channel, which essentially defines the shape of the notification, and it's the medium through which the notifications are sent, kind of. And then we have a listener, and that looks, and by design, it looks kind of like our post-save signal. The key difference is here that the decorator defines a trigger, so something which actually lives within the database and can't be skipped by bulk operations and the like. And the callback, which is the same as before, the email, will actually only be called asynchronously within the listening process. So the only thing left to talk about is how we actually start the listening process. Well, this actually happens just via a simple management command, which comes with the library, which you can just plug in like this, and then you have a dedicated listening process which utilizes the multi-processing module to spin off as many sub-processes as you want. So that's just basically a whirlwind tour of this pattern. If you want to read about more of this, and also other libraries which interface between Postgres and Django, I would recommend checking out the Opus 10 repo on GitHub. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, Paul.
So I feel like a new speaker because this is the first one I've done since lockdown, and I've kind of forgotten how to do it, so bear with me. Okay, why old tech matters and why you should care. Because we spend a lot of time thinking about shiny new things at conferences like this. And as you can tell, I'm not exactly shiny and new. I've been working now for nearly 40 years, and I was lucky enough, my second job, to start programming the internet, which probably means that I've been doing this longer than some of you have been alive. And I'm still enjoying it. So I gratuitously put this photo in any talk I do if I can possibly do it, because that was me once upon a time when I had my startup. And I have to say, I didn't look like that then either. So I've done lots of things in my working life. I've been a coder, I've been a manager, a startup founder, and I've been freelancing ever since I closed down the startup. I'm still enjoying it, and I'm not retiring. But many people my age are, and there's a problem with that. Because I think it was Sasha at the beginning saying how she thought, no, that the code wouldn't be there in 10 years' time. You will be surprised how much old code there is out there. And then when people like myself who are retiring, and we are the people who understand that old code, there's going to be a problem, because in some cases it's still business critical. I'll tell you a quick story about that. I've been a freelancer for a while. I used to have this regular job with one of the financial institutions in town. They had a bit of software running on an old bit of hardware, and the hardware was about to fail, and nobody knew how the software worked. But they couldn't take it out because it was mission critical. So I kept getting the job to go in, take the reinstall Perl on a new machine, reinstall that piece of software on that new machine. And we'd go through this cycle where I'd go, great, I've got the tarballs, give me access to the server, I'll compile it all up, I'll be done within the day. And they'd go, no, we can't give you a compiler because, we're a financial institution, we can't let you have that much access. And I'd go, okay, well, I can't do the job then. Anyway, this went round and round, and every few years what would happen is I'd be asked to do the job, the guy who hired me to do the job would then retire because they got to the age where they got the redundancy package that they wanted. The next manager didn't understand why we were doing this at all. The project would get canned, and I'd go, thank you very much, here's my invoice. Over and over and over again. But people my age, I say, they're retiring, or sadly, they're dying. I've lost 2 ex-colleagues this last month alone. But the software keeps living on, and it needs maintenance, it needs replaced. So, that's why I care. Why should you care? Well, the reason is, there is the old code out there, and there's a lot of money in old code, and I'm a freelancer, so this kind of matters. The businesses don't care about the shiny new things. They care about their bottom lines, they care about their profits. So, if you've got fairly old software running on fairly old hardware, it's an expensive problem. And as a freelancer, that's the kind of problem I like. An example of that, I don't know if anybody here remembers Russell Winder. I met him at the PyCon UK conference several years ago. He got in touch once and said, Rachel, you don't happen to know any Fortran, do you? Because I've got a client who's desperate to find a programmer who can do Fortran 4, Fortran 66. And I went, funny you should say that. My first job was in Fortran. Sadly, I couldn't take the project on, but it would have been very, very well paid. So, that's why I care about it, because it's lucrative. It's a really good way to work on interesting projects, and it's fun. Well, I think it's fun. It feels more like software archaeology than software development, because you have to understand what's going on, even when there's no documentation, and nobody around who knows what's going on. So, lucrative and fun. These are 2 of my favourite things. Put them together, and it's a great way to work, which is why I'm not planning on retiring anytime soon. So, that's why. Thank you.
So before I start, if anyone in the audience can take a couple pictures of me for my mum, which I can send to her today, that would be great. Send to me through Discord later. But yeah, I'll be talking about how to use the flow state to recover from burnout. Unfortunately, I went through a pretty bad case of burnout last year. My burnout was characterized by anxiety and panic attacks whenever anyone sent me a message, like, could you please do X? That just freaked me out so much because I was so overworked and I had taken on too many responsibilities. I was also completely uninterested in work. I used to love working, and I just didn't want to do it anymore. In fact, I wasn't really interested in anything, so it was sort of like a mild case of depression even. And I was basically incapable of doing work. I couldn't sit down and do work anymore, and I don't know how to explain it better than I couldn't do it. There was a block in my brain, so it was pretty bad. How many of you are familiar with the concept of flow state? That's good, that's good. I'm happy to hear that. In case you are not familiar with the concept, Flow is a state of optimal engagement and immersion in an activity characterized by a seamless and enjoyable experience. So these are 2 book recommendations. The first one is Flow. This is where the term flow state comes from. And the other one is Cal Newport's Deep Work, which talks about sort of how to apply flow to your work in order to do like very deep and concentrated work. But flow is not just useful for productivity, it feels really good. If you look at the definition again, seamless and enjoyable experience. Does this look seamless and enjoyable to you? No, it's horrible. So I had a theory. If I can get more flow in my life, then I would be happier. So I came up with a system to increase the amount of hours I spend in flow state every day, basically. So phase 1 was to find any activity that creates a flow state. And because I couldn't do any work, it had to be play. My activity of choice was puzzles. I also did horse riding and knitting, all kinds of fun activities. And I enjoyed it, and I could do it for hours. Don't forget, you can track and measure flow, because you can measure the amount of hours you spend in a flow state, and you can actually set yourself little goals every week. Phase 2 is to slowly transition back into doing work. So you start with activities that kind of feel like work, but you can still enjoy them because you're slowly kind of getting used to working again and you're recovering from that burnout state. For me, I started with writing my blog. I enjoyed writing. I could do it for hours, just time passed. Cleaning and organizing is also a good one. Reading, learning, and finally coding. So I started with fun projects, and then I moved on to my regular kind of day job again. And I got to the point where I enjoyed my work again, and I was happy to go to work every day. So the main things I want you to know is that resting is often not enough for burnout recovery. If you go on an extended holiday after burning out, when you go back to work, your old problems are still waiting there. Nothing has changed, really. Nothing has changed in your brain. So your strategy is not to rest. It's to get used to enjoying work again, enjoying your life again. And second, working in a flow state is good for productivity and mental health. So if you pick up those books and you read them, remember, they always talk about productivity, like, oh, be super productive, but it also feels good. So optimize for flow. May your life be flowy. Thank you.
Explain why.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark.
Please.
You did a great job hosting the lightning talk. Thank you so much. So I will always start my talk by showing the first slide and say that it's the most important slides of the talk. And believe me, it's true, because every time I give this lightning talk, and if I don't put this slide, and then people can't have, you will see why. Just take a picture of this slide. I'll give you a few times to take it. It's fine. We have 5 minutes. It's fine. So, why we should care about CRA and how it can affect you and your work. So what is CRA? This is the very, very legit question, because first of all, who have heard about CRA? Okay, there's more and more people, but still, a lot of you don't know. That's why I'm asking this question and trying to answer this question. So CRA is the short form for Cyber Resilience Act. But who remember GDPR? I hope all of you have heard about GDPR. And you have eaten a lot of these cookies because you have to click yes when you go to a website. So now we have the Cyber Resilience Act, which is another thing that could change our life forever, just like the GDPR, because now we have to click accept cookies. To make it short, because I only have like 5 minutes, or maybe like only 4 minutes now, to explain what is CRA. So to put it short, it's basically like putting this logo. We have all seen this logo before. So it's like, kind of a stamp of approval on your product. For example, your kettle or your microwave. I don't know what else you have, but so now we want to put that on the software just to make sure it's safe to use. So it's a good thing, right? Because we use software every day. It could be a malware, it could be something that like is very vulnerable and someone can hack it and steal our data or whatever. So it's a good thing, right? We want to make sure everything is safe. But, you know, we are talking about open source here now, so like that, you know, can that small project there got like the approval, you know, to check is it a compliance or anything, you know? Did that dude who maintained it since 2003 get the money? I don't know. So, yeah, we really can't do, you know, we don't have the money. If you really read it, you actually find a link to read it later. If you really read it, there's like some exception for non-commercial activity and all this stuff, right? We should be fine. But what is a commercial activity? Think about it. Think about, for example, the DSF. Like today we have the workshop. We talk about, oh, how we can get more donation and stuff. Like now, you know, is accepting donation a commercial activity? So what about if, for example, you know, your company have a product, you want to convince your company to open source this product, is it okay now? You know, maybe your company will say no. You know, can I work for open source during my office hour? Can I, if I, for example, you're a startup company, can you like have a cloud service based on open source now? Because, you know, so now you have to get it approved. So yeah, but you're a startup, you don't have money. So, strange. So what should I do? Like, I really don't want to have all these, like, you know, the product I use and love to be in trouble, you know, or my company will tell me, stop using it because we can't get the compliance and stuff. So, yeah, what should I do? It's quite scary. So I would suggest everybody, since like those of you who hasn't raised their hand before, now you can raise your hand and say that I know what is CRA and I'm going to tell you about it. So get more information and then tell people about it. So this is by the Open Forum Europe. So they have a panel session. Unfortunately, if you see the video, it's like all white male, is very homogeneous. But they did invite Deb, who is like the executive director of the PSF, and also tried to invite me to be there. But unfortunately, both of us can't make it, so that's why it's like that. But yeah, they try. So, but watch it. You get more information. Also, there are all these links that you can get more information. That's why you have to get the link of this slide deck, because you don't want to type it all in yourself. And also, in EuroPython, we are thinking about organizing an conference discussion about CRA. So if you're coming to EuroPython, you can also discuss all this stuff, your concern and everything together. So yeah, it's going to help to raise awareness and make sure that like now we can give in some like amendment and make sure that everything will be fine for us, or at least less damaging for us. So I think that's our... Yes.
Absolutely spot on.